Truce and his field assistants performed this survey despite the fact that the Cherokees still live there. The report called attention to areas well suited to agriculture and identified mineral resources such as gold, roofing slate, marble, limestone, graphite, and iron. To the disappointment of the legislature, Truce determined that gold prospects in the Ocoee district were minimal and less valuable than in the neighboring states. But Tennessee, like neighboring states, was anxious to learn what natural resources could be found in Cherokee lands, was eager to use new advances in science to do so. One prominent Southerner who took a very visible interest in the mineral resources of the Cherokee Nation was John C. Calhoun. As Secretary of War under President Monroe, Calhoun helped the President redirect federal policy away from support of the civilization program and toward increased pressure for land cessions from the Indians. Also as Secretary, Calhoun ordered several scientific explorations of Indian territories that gathered intelligence on Indian populations and village locations, transportation routes, possible fort locations, and other natural resources. Although Calhoun did not play a direct role in the Cherokee removal of 1838, he was a major architect of U.S. removal policy and strategies to pressure Eastern tribes into ceding their lands. Calhoun was the most prominent gold mine owner in Cherokee, Georgia. He used slaves to work the mine and asked his son-in-law, Thomas G. Clemson, a European-trained engineer, to oversee operations of his gold mine for several years. Calhoun took an active interest in his Georgia gold mine and made the trip from his home in South Carolina to Dahlonega and Auraria nearly every summer, beginning in 1833 and throughout the rest of his life. In 1837, Calhoun and Fanshawe met in Dahlonega, and they spent 3 days traveling through the gold region, visiting the mines and inspecting other mineral deposits in the mountains. Calhoun was sincerely interested in learning more about geology. He was interested in learning about new technological advances in mining, advances in the science of agriculture, and advances in transportation engineering. Calhoun used his position in the U.S. Senate to lobby for the construction of the Dahlonega Mint, which was located near his mine in Auraria. Calhoun was also a lifelong advocate of internal improvements. As Secretary of War, he drew up a plan for internal improvements to aid movement of troops and weapons in times of war. Calhoun recommended a broad program of improvements that included canals, improvements to the navigation of inland rivers, and construction of roads to connect inland rivers with Atlantic ports. One of his most visible projects was a 1,500-mile national road, which would run from Washington to New Orleans. Several routes for this national road were proposed, including one that passed through Knoxville, then south through the Cherokee Nation. Another new technology which caught the attention of Southern leaders was railroad engineering. In the 1820s and 1830s, steam railroad technology was still in its infancy. When the second steam railway in the country, the Charleston to Hamburg, South Carolina Railroad, began partial operations in 1830, many Southern leaders began envisioning railroad projects throughout the South, including lines that ran through the Cherokee Nation. They proposed railroads to connect the Tennessee River with ports on the Atlantic and the Gulf, such as Charleston and Mobile. Their primary goal was to open the interior of the South to eastern U.S. and foreign markets. Calhoun and former U.S. Senator Robert Y. Hayne of South Carolina were strong supporters of an east-west railroad project that they had hoped would revive Charleston's floundering economy as well as contribute to a Southwest political alliance. They disagreed, though, on where the western end of the East-West Railroad should terminate. Hayne wanted a terminus in Louisville and one in Cincinnati so that the railroad could tap the Ohio River in the northwest. In 1835, at the request of Hayne and the South Carolina legislature, Secretary of War Lewis Cass sent several officers and Fanshawe to accompany Colonel James Gadsden on a survey of the proposed railroad line. After the engineers determined the feasibility of crossing the Southern Appalachians, a convention was held in Knoxville to encourage interstate support. Citing the report by the Topographical Corps, Hayne and the Knoxville Convention argued for a route from Knoxville through the mountains to Asheville, North Carolina, using the French Broad River Valley. Now that route, which was eventually built, but not right away, actually skirted what was then the Cherokee Nation. However, Calhoun is still pushing for routes through the Cherokee Nation. Calhoun favored instead two routes that ran further south. One would pass through the Cherokee country and the Muscle Shoals and terminate at Memphis. The other would pass through Cherokee country and Middle Tennessee, ending near the mouth of the Missouri River. To promote the Memphis route, Calhoun urged the citizens of Shelby and Fayette counties of Tennessee to press for a railroad charter. A special act was passed by the state legislature in December 1835 that chartered the LaGrange and Memphis Railroad. Construction on the LaGrange and Memphis Railroad began in 1837, but the economic panic later that year contributed to the company's financial problems and put an end to construction. One of the problems with Calhoun's Middle Tennessee route was finding a pass through the Southern Appalachians. In 1836, Calhoun and Gadsden identified a gap in the Carolina mountains between the Tuckasegee and Whitewater valleys, and they gave the gap a real original name, the Carolina Gap. The proposed route ran through the Cherokee Nation, and in South Carolina, the route followed the old Cherokee trade path to Charleston. Although Calhoun's Tuckasegee Railroad was never built, other commercial railroads proposed for the Cherokee Nation, which unfortunately we don't have time to discuss today, like the Hiwassee and the Western Atlantic railroads, were built. Another reason Southern military leaders were looking at implementing new railroad technologies in Cherokee country was for military purposes. Calhoun and General Edmund P. Gaines, who was originally from East Tennessee, advocated a system of railroads that crisscrossed the country that could be used to transport troops and supplies for defense purposes. Gaines and Calhoun believed that the aforementioned Memphis to Atlantic Railroad could serve as both a military transport system and to promote Southern commerce. As one of the commissioners for the new railroad, Gaines was instrumental in convincing the Tennessee General Assembly to authorize $500 towards the survey. A lack of engineering expertise presented problems, though, so Southern leaders looked for experienced engineers from the U.S. military. Gaines was able to use his high-ranking position in the Army to secure the services of Colonel Stephen Harriman Long, a gifted and experienced member of the Corps of Topographical Engineers. Long's survey began in the summer of 1834 when he traveled to Alabama and met with the officers of the Tuscumbia, Portland, and Decatur Railroad. They supplied him with materials for the project. Long's salary was paid for by the states of Tennessee and South Carolina. After Long surveyed a route through Cherokee lands, Gaines arranged for Long to survey a more southern route and to have his expenses paid by the Atlantic and Mississippi Railroad. Gaines was enormously pleased with Long's work, and he sent a glowing report to Washington stressing the importance of an internal improvement project that would connect the Mississippi River and the Atlantic seaboard through Cherokee lands. Although there was wide support for a Western railroad, the Memphis to Charleston Railroad suffered many setbacks. Parts of the system were completed in the 1830s. Other sections of the railway, which Gaines hoped would become part of his great east to west rail system, failed financially in the next few years. Gaines never ceased lobbying for either the Memphis to Charleston Railroad or his great national rail defense system. In 1839, Gaines sent a proposal to Congress that outlined 7 major rail systems, one of which was a rail network from Memphis to Charleston with branches to Milledgeville, Georgia, and East Florida. Like earlier Gaines proposals, this latest Memphis to Atlantic plan placed the railroad through the newly vacated Cherokee Nation. 2 other strong supporters of using the latest engineering technologies to build transportation routes through Cherokee country were Governors George Troup and Wilson Lumpkin of Georgia. In 1826, Lumpkin, while serving on Governor Troup's Board of Internal Improvements, visited Cherokee country for the purpose of finding a route for a canal through the southern Appalachians to connect the rivers of Georgia to tributaries of the Tennessee River. I guess I don't have to tell you that canal was never built. The trip also served as a diplomatic mission in that Lumpkin spoke with Cherokee leaders at the behest of Governor Troup to prepare them for the idea of a complete removal from the state to lands west of the Mississippi. Lumpkin spent 25 days with the state engineer examining Cherokee country. They settled on a route between the South Fork of the Hiwassee River and the Conestoga River in Georgia. However, Lumpkin became convinced that the best solution was not a canal, but a railroad. Like railroads, river navigation was the responsibility of the states. However, Tennessee was a little slow in addressing the issue of river navigability and in establishing a board of internal improvements. At his first meeting in 1832, Tennessee's new Board of Internal Improvements asked President Jackson to appoint Colonel Long to the task of improving the Holston Tennessee rivers from Knoxville to the Alabama state line. Long took 2 civil engineers and 3 engineers from the Corps of Topographers with him. The lands on the south side of the Tennessee River, from the mouth of the Hiwassee River to the state line, all belonged to the Cherokees, but their permission to conduct the survey was not sought. The section of the river from Ross's Landing to the Alabama line was notorious for its sandbars and whirlpools. Steamboats rarely traversed the section of the river. Instead, separate steamboats operated above and below the obstacles on the Tennessee River. The obstacles on the Tennessee River located near Ross's Landing. Ross's Landing, in case you don't know, is my hometown, Chattanooga. Long recommended over $58,000 in improvements, including straightening and deepening the channel, creating warping facilities, and constructing a sluice and dam. The work took several years to complete, but by 1835, steamboats were able to travel from Alabama to Knoxville when the water level allowed. The river navigation improvements not only aided commerce on the upper Tennessee River and its many tributaries, but made the Cherokee settlement at Ross's Landing more attractive to whites as an important transportation hub.